bury the hatchet, then how to bear arms? If I bury the hatchet, then how to bear anything? If I bury this hatchet, then I'll need to bury that one, then the next, and the one after that. The opposite of bury the hatchet, truth in the forge, the hammered word, hot edges cooled, then chipped, dulled, then sharpened, handed back, handle first, blade pointing towards my own palm. The second poem I'm going to read was a villanelle form, and I actually wrote this in my class with Florence Mesh. And it's the villanelle form loosely. It's called, it's probably about grief. It's called The Weeping Willow. When I forgive, I'll dress in bark, spotted green, with lichen growing on my face, roots exposed like knees, tucked and rotted, felled by a great wind. Hair bushy, clotted brown, veined and dry enough to spark. When I forgive, I'll dress in bark, spotted only by night owls, talon and moon-dotted, hunting blind mice who bury their fear, along with their dead, under roots tucked and rotted. I'll drape myself in maple's crimson flame, my shame blotted by crown shadow, catkin, the tendril reach of forgiveness, dressed in spotted gown. The turning of leaf and a life rightly allotted to hollow spaces once woody and dense. They dress to let go, bark boycotted, stripped and pitted, every limb a carotid to the heart of our faults. I'll humbly fall when I forgive. I'll dress, bark spotted, root exposed. I'll tuck my knees rotted. Okay. The last poem is a little bit of a show and tell. I didn't realize we were going to get to read all three. So this is a broadside that I made with my partner John Deere, who's a painter, of this poem. We didn't do this work together. My poem is responding to his painting, but we have taken 2 sabbaticals in Italy, and he's painting and I'm writing poems, and this happens to be one of the things that came out of that. It's called Papavere il faro, and papavere is poppies, and il faro means beacon. So one of the things I often did was just take the language that I needed every day and try to smash it together and see what happened in the poem. And when we were there in May, one of the words you need to know is poppies, because they're just everywhere, and they're stunning, and they're brief. And so that's what this is. Papavere il faro, poppies beacon. Vermilion lanterns hung along the grassy slopes, flash of cinnabar among the buttercups, 1,000 delicate flames, flagging every hawk that circles the windy terraces. Sanguine faces cropped, blushing from stone walls, tangled with sweet pea and the olive groves. Spring's brief beacon blinks its bright eye. One day a lighted path, the next lost. Thank you.
Our next and last winner is Kyle Roscoe. He's an MFA candidate at North Carolina State University. He's currently working on his first book of poems, tentatively titled The Book of Bad Fathers. He enjoys exploring different subgenres of jazz music, playing bananagrams with his wife, and reading strange poetry to his 6-month-old son, Emil. He's also a big fan of Coen Brothers films, Liverpool Football Club, and Boston Red Sox.
Yeah.
Please welcome Kyle Roscoe.
Thanks, y'all. How the fuck am I going to follow all that? So many beautiful poems. Back to Liberty, a robot, right here. That was beautiful. So many wonderful poems. Yeah, I feel really honored. I'll echo what everybody else said. I feel really honored to be up here reading with all these winners. There are so many beautiful poems today. And Yeah, I've been crashing the party my whole life, so it feels nice to be invited for once. I'm gonna read y'all some poems. I'm just gonna read the 3 poems that won this Cosmic Picnic. So this first is a poem. Suicidal man prepares to bury his dog. Prepares. That's my dad's New Jersey getting in me. Suicidal man prepares to bury his dog. Slouched on the bench, the crunch of fallen leaves beneath his shovel. He trails his eyes along the tree's roots, admires how they follow their path out and down into the heart of the earth. Then sweeps an index finger down his arm, marvels at the reckless sprawl of the brachial vein, the thick fragility of the radial artery. His arm quivers at the thought of how tenuous it all is, this complex network of sinews. The stump of the tree would take more force to cut. He feels along for the split of channels under his skin, traces the forking thunder of his bloodways, holds his arm up to the fractal divisions of the tree roots. The man picks up his shovel, prepares to dig, to knife the blade of his instrument into the surface in search of his own division, the siren song of solitude inside dead skin. All right, so this next poem I'm going to read is a poem from my dad, and I haven't read it in front of him before, so he might be a little ticked that I'm reading this poem in front of y'all, but we're going to find out. So it's called Foreman. It's called Foreman. It's for my dad. Your eyes ignite for the first time since the war, when I come in bearing a burn on my arm, the proud mark of a young man too curious of fire. You taught me about fire then. As you tumble off the couch into action to help me, I see the seething embers jump in your eyes, akindle with fevered memories of the Iraqi boy, burned, ripped, spilling, squirming sick on the cold silver operating table. Your wild hands dancing frantically like a moth losing control of its wings. You toss your arms over your head, one final failing protest against the flood rolling in. The boy's father, glaring in, boiling red, accuses you of not trying your hardest, screaming at you, my son was on the wrong side, but did nothing wrong, and you killed him. There are no sides, you mumble to me now in a tender, heavy voice, as your limbs flail about the first aid kit, like a lunatic trying to halt the roaring wind with rolls of gauze and bottles of peroxide. I remind you that it's just a little burn, that I'll be fine, but you don't hear me. Thanks, y'all. I got one last poem to read. And since I'm the last reader, let's just give one last round of applause for all the wonderful poems that were read by the winners and honorable mentions. So this last poem requires a little bit of context too. Those of you who lived in Raleigh for a while may remember this, but there used to be on the corner of Hillsborough and Enterprise, there used to be a bar called Sadlack's Heroes. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. Yeah. So, and hands in the room, who remembers this place? Cool, so there's a few of you. So now it's this giant aloft hotel. So, you know, growing up you hear all these stories about industrialization and how it changes things, but when you're confronted with it up to that degree, it's pretty astounding. So I wrote this poem actually before Sadlack's went down. I used to work right next door to it, and it was always a really fascinating place. There was a bartender there named Simone, and she was incredible the way she handled all the drunks and crazy people that came through there. So this is a sestina. It's called Sadlack's Heroes, and it's for Simone. She twirls behind the counter like a ballerina, spinning between the counter and the taps, stashing a rocky balance of cheap beer and whiskey, which always stays miraculously below the edge, for the gruff men who will never pay their tabs, and for me as I crumble another failed sestina. Have you ever tried to write a sestina drunk? To bestow the grace of a ballerina onto your pen with shaky hands, keeping tabs of N-words while Big Jim Lincoln taps, taps, taps at the bar, just to cause a ruckus, filled to the edge of his hot-blooded cheeks with ire and whiskey. His veins grow bluer and thicker as the whiskey runs up to the wrinkles laid in rows like a sestina on his forehead, tucked beneath the edge of his hat. His temper leaps like a ballerina when Simone ignores his persistent taps to tend to men who actually tip on their tabs and don't start 3 fights a week. Don't keep tabs of whose buttons can be pushed with enough whiskey. Big Jim storms from the counter, briskly taps a man's shoulder. I look up from a floundering sestina to see if Simone, with the tenacity of a ballerina, can keep Big Jim from spilling over the edge. Simone sprints over, grabs Jim by his shirt's edge, yells how it's been weeks since he's paid his tab. Get out. If he wanted, he could outmuscle the ballerina, but not now. He's a hot mess of shame and whiskey. So it goes every Tuesday night, repetitive as a sestina, as Simone returns to her station amongst the taps. Filling the glasses, the men at the bar will clink and tap together in laughter, warm beer spilling over the edge. The 6 buddies huddle like the verses of a sestina, belt out Auld Lang Syne, settling their tabs with stomps and hand claps. Eyes misty with whiskey, they lace their arms tight as the slippers of ballerinas. What a ballerina act. Policing these heroes, keeping tabs of all the taps on the counter, still filling my cup to the edge with whiskey, while I try to write this damn sestina.
In a couple minutes, we're going to have a break. And there are some books up on the 3rd floor. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the only winners this year we had books with Terry Savoy and Kieran. Kieran did not bring her book, but it's a wonderful book. It's a finalist for the Super Award, and you can talk to her about it and tell you how you can order it. And in a minute, they're going to go outside and have their photo taken by the Cary News. But they don't know this, but I did want to ask them before we let them go, why do you write poetry? What's the point? I just go in order.
We get to start over here, right?
Your voice is warmed up.
My voice is
Where's
warmed up.
Matthew? Where's Matthew? Did he leave? Come on, what are you going to try to say? Matthew gets to answer
In
this
fact,
first.
Matthew, would you like to go first?
Yes, he gets answer first.
So I'm at NC State studying with Dorianne Lux, and Dorianne talks a lot about, should I step up to the mic probably? Yeah, that's probably a good idea. She talks a lot about the moment where you first realized that you had something in you that you wanted to get out. And I think that for me, so I started at community college and took a creative writing class, was convinced I wanted to be a fiction writer. And then the first short story I turned in was very short and very detail-oriented. So my teacher, Al McGinnis, who's still one of my top mentors, told me, "You're not a fiction writer, you're a poet." And I think when Dorianne says that, I think what I go back to is stories that my dad told me and going to that. So there's just something, like starting with that, there's just something in me that I, felt like I wanted to get out in the world. I guess that's kind of an obvious answer, but that's all I got on short notice. So there it is. That's all I got.
Come on over here. Next person, come on. We can kind of gag a little here, right?
It's a terrifying question.
I know.
I think for me it comes back maybe to stories as well. My dad was and is an amazing storyteller, and when we were kids, we would all pile in my parents' bed, and he would tell stories to put us to sleep. And I think that sense of a voice that you love in the dark is, for me, at the heart of poems. It's something I love to hear. It's something I want to make. So I think I come back to that sense of a voice in a kind of vast darkness. But I think it's an approximate answer. It's also like chocolate and bad men. Don't quit, I think. All right, to follow that up. Well, I guess to keep up with the theme of going back to childhood, I mean, I've always kind of written poems. Actually, my mom wrote my poems down before I could write them myself, so I would illustrate these little books that she very lovingly stapled together and write all of my poems that I orated to her. And as my parents will probably attest to you, I have quite the imagination and a lot to say, so poets seem to make sense, I guess. But I think that realistically, I don't know, it just there's a lot of bad in the world, and there's a lot of bad that happens to a lot of us. And I think even if you're writing about the bad and writing through some of that, you know, you are in some ways making something beautiful out of that darkness, out of that struggle. I am very blessed, and I know probably a lot of you knew her, to have worked and studied very closely with Claudia Emerson, who passed away several years ago. And she really opened poetry up to me and really helped me to see that was something that you could do, not just a sort of little pastime that you do on your own. So I owe a lot of who I am as a writer to her, and will continue to say that for as long as I'm alive. So.
I'm sort of new to poetry. I was always writing fiction as a child, but after I started undergrad and decided to do creative writing, and I decided to take poetry as my concentration and try to go somewhere different than fiction. And I realized there are more these condensed moments in someone's life. It's like looking into a window of a certain time and place, and I think poetry, it is really important with showing a narrative of a certain place, and I fell in love with it, and so now I'm trying to get on with that for the rest of my life.
I don't write poetry for narrative. I can't tell a story to save my life. So I think I write for discovery and surprise, and meaning that I don't know beforehand when I'm writing. And I read for the same, I guess. I read poems because they show me the world in a different way that I can't explain, and it isn't reducible or framed in narrative. I wish I had something funny to say, but that's really what poems mean to me. They're a crystallization of different truths in different ways. And that's why I write, and that's what I hope to do.
I think everyone else has said it so wonderfully, but I always go back to two poets. When I think it was a question, one was Larry Levis, who said poetry is a condition of the spirit, and also Raul Zarita, who said that if a poem does anything, it gives compassion. So I think about that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you guys do both.
Oh, actually, okay. Well, very quick then. I know everyone is ready for the break. Pages 14 and 15. We had a Turkish poetry in translation competition, and initiated by Nezih Divitçi to honor his mother, Meral Divitçi. And Sylvie Wade and Efe Murat won the competition by their translation of Melik Cevdet Andar. Finally, it took us 3 years maybe, not us, but you know, everyone. We have the book. I'm holding it, I'm proud of it. It's an excellent book, we have it upstairs. You can stay and watch the video if you want. What we're gonna show you here is, you have one of the poems there on it. It's in both Turkish and English. There is Zülfü Livaneli is a very famous Turkish composer who also composes Nazım Hikmet and other poets. Actually composed this into a piece. So enjoy if you decide to stay here. books and coffee and snacks are upstairs on the third floor. And am I missing anything? Anyone else?
I didn't hear anything, but I know she didn't miss anything because she's good. Let's hear it for her.
I'm so good. I admit when I forget. This is last year's chapbook. You can find all 8 of them upstairs, and winners of this year's competition will be included in next year's festival. See you soon.